we'll just give us a few minutes so we can have Marcelo, and therefore we can start. Okay, Luis. How about if Daggett and Luis, maybe I can quickly just mention the biography of the three panel members, and that way we can actually use this time to actually introduce them and present them to the rest of the panel members and the rest of the participants. Yeah, yeah, Fabio. Yeah, yeah. Since we already started, maybe look, we're in the this is the expert panel on innovative responses on public policy with new migrational dynamics. And this is on public policies on migration. So this activity is done or performed attending the con of the deputy ministers to in the 24th meeting from the RCM celebrated last year in the city of Guatemala, where we actually approved this activity. We truly thank the support from IOM and the pro tempore presidency to actually hold this online, the virtual conference, and hopefully this is a tremendous benefit for everyone. So, Fabio, yes, why don't you go ahead and introduce the rest of the panel members, and then we can actually start with the opening remarks. Okay. Thank you so much, Luis. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, all the participants that have actually joined us to today's virtual session, and also the panel of experts, Dage, good morning, and representatives of all the member states that are coming to us. I'm going to use this time to actually mention about the trajectory of the background of all these panel members, because all of you actually have a copy. All of you have a very important background on migration issues. So let me start with Mary Mcauliffe. Marie is the chief of the research division of migration policy of IOM in Geneva. She's a specialist on international migration expert with 20 years of experience in different areas as a program manager and high official and investigator. She's the main investigator in the Global Migration Center in Geneva and member of the Sir Roland Wilson School of Demography in the National University of Australia. She's published and edited in different academic spheres and on migration policy. She edited the World Report on Migration with Martin Roos and the 2020 World Migration Report with Bernardo Nakadia from 2012 to 2014. Marie actually led the Australian Irregular Migration Investigation Program in Australia, of course. Now, let me talk about Andrew Seeley, who's also with us today. Andrew, he's a doctorate in policy studies from the University of Maryland. He has a master's in Latin American studies from the University of California, San Diego, and an associate from the Washington University in St. Louis. He is a president of the Migration Policy Institute, a non-party, bipartisan institute that seeks to improve migration policies and integration. And he also leads the Administrative Council from MPI Europe. And from MPI, he actually spent 17 years in the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he actually founded the Mexican Center, and they actually held the deputy presidency of the program deputy presidency and executive vice presidency. And he's an investigator worldwide migration with emphasis on migration policies in Latin America. And he's actually is an author of several books and different articles in recognized outlets. Sergio Bueno, he's has a master's in policy science with over 25 years of experience in the public sector. Over 1 year, he actually led the team that consolidated and streamlined the Colombian migration. He's the first authority. He's the first migration civil authority in Colombia, and he was the director for almost 3.5 years. And he's which is a model today in Latin America. Because of a service to the citizenship and safety and respect of human rights. Sergio, who was the manager of the Ibero-American Network of Migration Authorities, and participated more than 3 years as a strategic advisor in this process. And he was for DAS, for the Department of Safety Administration in Colombia. In the last years, he actually led greater strategies of development, advances, and the implementation of peace and post-conflict in Colombia. And also he's the director of anti-personnel mines in Colombia. So there's a vast experience of the panel members today. And you can find this in the eCampus field. The participant in this program can actually go in to the eCampus, and under the tab where it says panel experts, there's a series of additional resources, a series of resources that you can actually use and see and to check for your use. And among this, you can actually find the biography of all the three panel members. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fabio. Look, we're going to go ahead and start formally to this panel of experts, which is part of the program on the migrational formation studies from the IOM. From the RCM, we had some issues for Marcelo to join us to this part, but we know that he's actually listening to us. And you can also access his opening remarks in the eCampus as part of this program. So just to formally start this, we're going to pass the floor to the General Subdirector for Migration of Costa Rica on behalf of the Temporary Presidency, Mr. Daggett Hernandez. Good morning, Daggett. Go ahead. Well, good morning. Good morning to all of you members of the member states from the RCM. For us as a pro-temporary presidency is an honor to actually start or initiate and to comply with this agreement that was held in Guatemala in regards to the formation on migration policies, and to actually start with this process of executing the migrational policy formation. So our countries have had under huge challenge in regards to migration management from migration of origin, transit, and destination. Plus, or in addition to this, in our country, we have huge national issues or problems that have not been resolved. And the migrational issue in the past decades, actually the past decade has been an issue, a determining issue for the discussions of many of the policies. So these formation programs, or this program of formation, or any other program, has a tremendous relevance for those who participate in the development and execution of these migration policies, because this is a phenomena that varies and modifies itself. So we truly need to streamline and it could be ongoing, and this type of space actually allows to do this. And under this context, we have another huge issue, which is the global sanitary crisis, in which we have to assume or take this pandemic with a determining factor to actually attend, not just from a migration point of view, but also linked to the health factor from the flows into our countries. So we actually tremendously appreciate this, and we really thank the participation, and we invite you to actually benefit from this space. And we agree to all the different panel members today, and we invite all participants to actually use them. So, Sri Bueno and Mary and Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and analysis with us, dear panel members. Thank you, Daggett Hernandez, Deputy Director, on behalf of the pro-temporary presidency of the RCM. And I also want to thank all the different panel members, and also to recognize the effort that the pro-temporary presidency has had this year of actually transforming all these different activities that we had to do face-to-face to a virtual platform. So thank you so much, IOM's assistance to actually make this possible. Without further ado, Fabio Jimenez has the mic, who's going to help us with to moderate this dialogue, or this panel of experts. And between Fabio and myself, we'll help you to actually lead your questions and comments and others. Okay, so Fabio, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Luis Alonso. Thank you so much, Daggett. Good morning, everyone. Once again, good morning, all the participants who actually joined us to this session on panel experts. So let's get right into it because we know that there's a tremendous interest in actually using or benefiting from the experience from the three panel members. So let me go ahead and start with Mary. Mary is the first question. Mary is the following. Okay, so even though international migration has been a long-lasting phenomena, what would you say are the most important characteristics of migration today in terms of trends, mobility routes, migrant social profiles, and their motivations to migrate?
Fabio, and please just allow me just one moment to express my thanks and delight to be able to join you today. I do apologise that my bandwidth in Switzerland is low at the moment, so I can't turn my video on, but I'm hoping that you can hear me clearly. And it's the first time I've used Kudo, and I'm thrilled actually to be able to listen to the discussion in English as a non-Spanish speaker. So thank you very much to the Regional Conference on Migration, to the IOM office in San Jose, and also for this very innovative dialogue and the way that it is structured. As Fabio mentioned, I'm the first one to really answer the first question, and I think partly because within headquarters, within IOM, we are looking at global migration trends. We produce the World Migration Report, as Fabio mentioned earlier, which is released every 2 years. So we do have a number of partners and a number of relationships that allow us to draw on the latest data, research and analysis, including in relation to policy developments from all the world, so from around the world. So a shout out to many of my IOM colleagues and academic and applied researchers around the world who enable us to do this. During the preparation, and as Fabio mentioned, I am historically, I've worked on migration for a very long time, mainly as a senior official within the Australian government, but also in academia and now with IOM. So my backyard, so to speak, is especially Southeast Asia and Oceania. And in preparing an answer to this quite large question, but a very interesting one to start with, I drew on some work that I think highlights some similarities across different parts of the world and some longer term aspects in relation to how trends, routes, how migrants actually think about moving. And this is from a paper that I actually was commissioned to do by the Migration Policy Institute. So thank you very much to Andrew for this. It was when I was working at the Australian National University. And if you please allow me, I'll just read out a couple of sentences because it crisply and clearly kind of answers the big question, and then we can go on with the other panelists and talk about some of the aspects and different manifestations in different parts of the world. So in this respect, it was Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia has a long and complex history of migration within and outside the region, linked to economic development and income disparity, but also to demographic and social change, urbanisation, transnational civil conflict, as well as persecution. Migration flows within the region are often driven by mixed motivations, and many are unregulated or unauthorised. Countries within the region must often simultaneously contend with irregular labour migration flows, asylum and refugee flows, and a limited ability to generate basic incomes and live in safety and dignity. And I would emphasise the safety and dignity as something that is perennial across time, and it's also relevant right the way around the world and takes different manifestations and different forms. As we reflect on migration and migration trends, it's I think inherently true to say that people want to live in safety and in dignity, and often to allow their children to have better opportunities. Now, this isn't specific to migration. This is about communities around the world and the way that we would always like the next generation to have not only what we've had, but also to be able to improve their livelihoods. In that sense, migration is one option amongst a suite of many, and it could be described as a stepladder of opportunity, especially where people are facing unsafe and insecure situations within their own communities. So somewhere better might mean being free from persecution, for example. It might mean accessing education opportunities. It might mean overcoming poverty and extreme poverty in certain parts of the world. For some people, it means living in a society that is tolerant, that upholds the rule of law, that values equality of opportunity as well as merit. Because as we know, in many parts of the world, these values and these principles don't apply. In terms of trends and roots, what I would say is that they are very much connected to the rich historical contexts in which our societies, in which migrants and communities live, as well as geographic context, which is something that even today in a very transnationally connected world, we still are very much rooted to our geographies. So what we can see is long-term corridors that have developed over many years and many decades, if not longer. That's particular to all parts of the world. If you look at the latest data on international migrant stocks, as well as the more limited data that is available on international migration flows, we do see geography and historical contexts being very much played out in real time. The very significant caveat to that, which I'm sure we will spend a fair amount of time talking about, because it is in so many ways a game changer, is COVID-19. And we're seeing that COVID-19 immobility, it is unprecedented, which we all know. The immobility and the travel restrictions really haven't been seen to this degree in the modern era. And it is acting at the moment, with all the data and evidence that we have at our fingertips these days, it is acting as the great disruptor to migration. So what we can predict and that what we can project are that we will see reduced international remittances, for example, because of the changes in regards to migration patterns. We will see people at risk who are unable to leave those insecure, precarious lives, who are unable to realise the stepladder of opportunity. This is particularly acute for people who have been displaced, highly relevant, of course, within the Americas, but also other parts of the world, the Middle East and North Africa, as well as Africa and Asia. And we will see significant changes in regards to the application of human rights and the international community coming together to try and support those people who are stranded and those people who are unable to leave precarious lives in different situations. We are in many ways at the beginning of a significant transformation of migration that does relate to the restrictions around immobility. It is something that we are looking at the moment, and I'd be happy to share some upcoming publications that we are working on with people from all over the world, some of the leading migration researchers, including from the Americas, because we are aware that we need to be looking at the data and the evidence to be able to respond to crisis situations, but also to longer term trends around migration and mobility. So if you'd asked me the question, I think 6 months ago, my answer would have been somewhat different, as I'm sure the other panelists will also delve into. But at the moment, it's a timely opportunity for the conference to be coming together and talking about policy responses, because we are facing a very significant challenge in regards to striking the balance around human rights, around protection of populations, protection of people on the move, protection of people within communities, and it is certainly something that that we are all working collaboratively and cooperatively on to ensure a reduced harm. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Mary. Creo que es una
Thank you so much, Mary. I think it's a very comprehensive answer and very provocative answer. As you well said, there's a combination of factors that truly motivate the migrational process, and among these, the availability of sustainable livelihoods. It's very important. It really caught my attention that provocative sentence that you use or statement on that maybe we're very next to see a very important transformation in the migration world. So in this sense, Andrew, and using the fact that Mary actually used a few words from the Institute in answering this question. So how do you see those new characteristics and that part of international migration? What perspectives do you think that we're seeing in other parts of the world that we should consider in our own region? Thank you so much, Fabio. I also want to thank IOM, and I also want to thank Marcelo and Luis Alonso and you for your invitation to actually accompany the government of Costa Rica, Daggett, and the entire government of Costa Rica for your invitation, participating and sharing a few ideas. I think that Marie actually she's completely right. We're actually in a moment right now where we know that the mobility, and we actually live this. Our conceptual framework is a world in which mobility actually has been increasing, has doubled. The number of passengers have increased from 2002 to 2003 and 2017 has more than doubled the number of passengers. So migration actually grows maybe a bit less. Like Maria, she said in the World Report on Migration, has actually grown maybe about 25% from 2012 to 2020, but it's been going up. It's a slow growth of migration. It's a greater growth for mobility around this world. It's a growth. It's a growth from communications and possibilities of communication, and then all of a sudden the world comes to a complete dead stop. And this is something that's it's never seen before. At the beginning, we thought, well, this will blow over, maybe a couple months, 3 months, that's it, it'll blow over. But throughout time, we see and we realize, no, this is going to be a long-lasting issue, and mobility. Maybe slowly will come back. Maybe mobility will come back slowly, progressively. Maybe a small little package. Migration was completely stopped in the tracks because all the consulates were actually closed. The visa departments and asylum offices throughout the world is actually stopped. And if they're actually working with less than 100% capacity. So this mobility is going to take time to come back. It's quite possible that the mechanisms of mobility and migration are actually a lot less than they were before, at least for a good time. And like Mary actually said, the pressures on migration are going to be increased at one moment because the situation is quite complicated where people actually live. And right now, it's very difficult to where you actually want to migrate. You know, you don't do anything by going from Honduras to the U.S. right now. To if a cousin of yours, says, please don't come home to my house because I don't have employment, I can't give you work. And then the issue is going to be when the U.S. actually starts again, and then maybe Honduras, they may be a bit more affected by the recession, or Germany starts and they open up, and maybe Burkina Faso is still affected. So this is going to be the key moments in which we're going to have maybe a certain change in regards to mobility and in regards to migration and the pressures that we see. As he said, I think we'll see this more in the future. We're also going to see something that Maria actually mentioned as well. We've seen a lot of mixed flows. People actually move because of different reasons. This is a change. And it's very difficult to actually see exactly who leaves because of violence, or who moves because of economic opportunities, or who leaves because their family already left and they actually want to meet again with the family. So these are mixed motivations, and the mechanisms that we actually have are we're going to talk about maybe to see who needs protection and who really truly needs to be in a program on labor migration. So all these processes, we haven't really paused them up for the world that we live in right now. So we're talking about migrants in general. So when these are actually different flows due to different reasons, and these are not easy to separate either. We're also seeing that the mobility has been to March was a lot faster. It's about quicker, more than ever, thanks to the social media and the flow of information, technology of communication. When you see a movement like Syria, like the Venezuelans and people in Nicaragua to Costa Rica, all of a sudden the caravans and then the number of Central Americans that actually caravan to the U.S., all of a sudden this is actually moves a lot quicker. Right now, it's completely dead in the tracks, but we don't know exactly when all of a sudden the circumstances will change and they can actually generate pressures. And all of a sudden there's an unexpected movement. This is something that we still don't have systems to actually deal with this. These quick movements that are seen because the communication actually runs that we didn't have before. It's not, there's a lot more migration. In 20 years, I think we went up like about 25%. It's something, but it's not completely drastic. What did change was the time that this actually happens. Mobility actually the information moves so quickly, then all of a sudden, these circumstances actually change without having time to actually deal or to respond or to adjust our different schemes to this. And this is going to be latent into, not right now because everything is it's in its track, but all of a sudden this is going to move in an unexpected way. And my last point, and let me because Sergio, I'd love to see Sergio here because I think that another issue that we haven't taken into consideration, that the countries are actually changing. The receiving and destination countries are actually changing. So Mexican has one of the largest diasporas of the world, but now they're actually receiving a lot of migrants. So a lot of people that actually went there waiting to go to the U.S. are gonna stay in Mexico because they had no other choice and they don't want to go back home. And also they're gonna wait to go to the States, but they're gonna stay in Mexico, and also they're gonna stay in Mexico forever. Costa Rica, of course, from many years ago, and now it's a receiving country. Panama, same thing. They've always had some migration, and Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras. We need to see this. The mobility of population among these countries, but it's changing. Colombia was an immigration. Peru was a country of immigration. Also, they're a country of migration. Turkey, I can name a lot of countries. Morocco, the countries, the countries who receive a destination, and those countries who actually do both. And we have no idea exactly who's going to be on the other side after this happens or after this stops. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrew. Look, I think that I think it's very valid that you actually indicate, that you actually mentioned also to complement a few aspects that Mary actually mentioned. But effectively, according to the last report on world migration, we see that, as you well said, the countries of middle income countries actually increased receiving of migrants, and the high income countries, it was a very slight decrease, but it's a reduction. But as you say, there's a change in intensity and in direction, actually. And of course, together with Mary, you actually indicated the importance on the complexities and the different reasons that are actually very difficult to identify. And this is a question that maybe, according to your experience, your long experience as a decision maker, it'll be interesting to actually hear your answer. Now, after hearing the characteristics that Mary and Andrea actually mentioned, according to the new trends on migration and flows, I ask you, do you think that the states have the tools and the adequate institutional frameworks to attend this new modalities of international migration that we see today? Thank you. Yep, there you go, Sergio. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you so much. Look, first of all, I want to thank IOM in their office in Costa Rica, Marcelo Pisiani, for this invitation. I think it's an honor and privilege to participate, and also the RCM. I've always admired. It's one of the scenarios of dialogue, the most important in the region, and the oldest one, I believe. I think that through their dialogues and through discussions, we've been able to advance in a very importantly in public policy in regards to migration. So for me, it's a complete honor to be here with Luis, Fabio, and Daggett from the pro tempore presidency. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Look, let me go back to take part of the presentations that Mary and Andrew actually made in regards to that effectively. Look, the change on migrational flows in our region in the past 10, 12 years has actually, we actually seen a reconfiguration in the different flows, in the causes of this, and in times that truly has been very difficult, and it's actually challenged the governments and the member states to actually respond to these migrational flows. And I also want to refer to the fact that to our region that traditionally South America has actually been characterized by a migration which is fundamentally north-south. It's a migration that's been growing intra-regionally, and also thanks to a lot of political regional policy decisions. There's a few mechanisms that have been incorporated, like Mercosur, like the Pacific Alliance, and that they actually want to generate some integration in an orderly and with a vision which is completely complementary to the articulation of the different sectors with the generation of documentation. Now, upon this reality that we've actually seen in our region historically, I believe that today it's clearly there are trends that what we're seeing right now with Venezuela, for example, actually generated a massive exodus since 2015, with a special emphasis on 2016, 2017, that actually we saw more than 5 million Venezuelans leaving out into the world, and they concentrated into the region, more than 4.7 millions. And Colombia is the one who received almost over 70% of Venezuelans. So this migration flow, we need to recognize the different entities and the governments who were simply not prepared to receive them. And I think that this experience has taken us that precisely that we can actually make the governments aware and the states aware on the importance on defining public migration public policies. And this year, we're going to have an analysis and an assessment from the Migrational World Pact in November, so we can actually prepare ourselves for the following years. And I think this allows us clearly to actually prepare ourselves from the institutional architecture to think about public policy from the normative part as well. I think that a public policy on migration must have two components, very important components, from respect on sovereignty and also on focus on human rights. And I think that we need to make some normative changes or adjustments in the governments that allows us to actually embrace this migration. And I believe that in addition to this, of preparing the structure of the government, we need to integrate as we've been doing in this region, which is quite important, I believe. And it's precisely, we need to understand that migration is not just is defined under processes and certain stages, but during those stages and during those processes, there's some levels of governance of migration that we need to have. So I believe that that we were not prepared for this. I think that the states have been adapting quickly to a humanitarian response. Logically, the dimension, the reality of this issue is a lot bigger than the capacities of the states. I think that any public policy outcome, and we can see this in the Lima Group and the Quito process. You know, they must come out from the regional level that allows to actually adopt governance measures that allows to prepare ourselves for the future. And I truly share the idea that COVID actually implied a step back of what we've been actually developing in the region and advancing on the actions of third dimensions to develop a socioeconomic inclusion process. It was a huge break on this in the region where she's seen the return of Venezuelan citizens back to their countries. To date, we have about 80,000 Venezuelans that have gone back. So this implies to have an institutional response to attend these people that are going back. And in any case, I do share the idea that even though we were preparing ourselves, we've been preparing ourselves, and probably see this later on at the normative and at the institutional level, and also at the integral response from all the parts of the state. I think this is essential. And before we didn't see this, the migration for years was conceived as a safety issue or security issue, where only the Immigration Authority was the only competent authority for this. Today, the dimension that was acquired, we need an articulation which is vertical, horizontal, and especially in the cities that actually receive all these migrants. Thank you so much, Sergio. It's very interesting what you actually mentioned. It's a true change in how to actually approach this from different parts, and we see actors, private stakeholders, and I think there's, and I also, Mary, I also want to propose to you another counter question, and is the following. Sergio actually mentioned something very important, which is the balance between some global commitments, voluntary global commitments, now for the migration governance. Now, agreements that are actually necessary at the regional level, agreements between countries from the neighboring regions, like Sergio mentioned about South America. And obviously the balance on policies at the national level. So this balance between the different levels of decisions, besides the different parts of or issues that Andrew mentioned about the expressions of destination and origin countries, this presents interesting challenges for the states in public policies. I don't know if you agree with this.
Agree with this, and I would be calling really back on my past working in immigration in the government of Australia, and I was involved in a lot of RCPs, especially the Bali process, of course, but working in what was then International Cooperation Branch, which looked at Australia's position in regards to immigration as it related to multilateral engagement, to UN and international organisations, regional cooperative and consultative processes, as well as bilateral discussions and technical assistance in particular, as well as various forms of sort of negotiations, even over visas, for example, and access to economies and so forth. And what I would say is one thing that has really significantly changed in the last sort of 20 sort of plus years is the understanding that international cooperation, however defined, that can be multilateral, it can be trilateral. It is supplemented heavily by bilateral cooperation as well. It is absolutely essential. This isn't anymore, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was kind of nice and it was a bit of a niche area. That is no longer the case. And so we are seeing a groundswell of support and activity and a recognition, I think, that we do need to be working together, but in a number of different ways, to be able to support really looking at, and I'll use the words of the Global Compact, safe, orderly, regular migration. I've never come across any kind of official or any researcher, any person on the street really who condones, for example, trafficking and human trafficking of people. But once you have irregular migration pathways open up, traffickers and illicit kind of migration service providers, if you like, and criminal activities, they have much more of an opportunity to be able to traffic people. And we're seeing this in regards to modern day slavery, in regards to human trafficking victims and so forth, because of the difficulties in terms of managing some of those environments. So this is really well understood, and it's actually crisp and very clearly illustrated when you look at the ratifications and adoptions of various instruments, as well as, and I would include in that, governance arrangements in regards to RCPs. And you will see that over time we have certainly increased engagement, and through practical support, as well as through bilateral cooperation on areas of mutual interest. Because there is an expansion and an understanding that mutual interest genuinely is mutual, that we have to balance sovereignty, managing borders and protecting communities alongside human rights. And that is the big tension and challenge, I think, for all of us who are involved in migration. And it is certainly something that we are seeing in regards to the responses to COVID-19 and the real need to safeguard the human rights of migrants, whether they're stranded, whether they are returning to Venezuela, as Sergio mentioned, whether they are in displaced population settings, camps and camp-like settings. That's going to be an increasing challenge for states, an increasing challenge for civil society as well as for UN. And that's why these types of forums are so important, to understand the multi sort of faceted nature of migration governance, and to be able to really realise the appetite for cooperation through efficient and coordinated mechanisms. Thanks.
Muchísimas gracias, Mary. Muchísimas gracias porque efectivamente, sobre todo con lo que acabas.
Because what you actually just indicated on the needs of coordination mechanisms, and we'll go to the next part of the panel, which is has to do a bit more on specific answers that the countries have actually given in different parts in the world. I think that all three of you has helped us to understand what the panorama is in regards to migration, what are the demands, present and future, towards migration policy, according to the current situation and historical trends. And right now, I actually want to ask very kindly if we can actually center on effective responses from a few of the countries, and then maybe in a few cases we can actually, in some way, we can actually study a bit further in our region, and maybe replicate these with the required adaptations. Now, in this regard, Andrew, I have the following question for you. Can we define an integral focus of the government in matters on migration policy, like Mary said, demands an articulated work between or among public stakeholders at different levels of the government, but also from the private sector, from civil society and national and international stakeholders that operate in this environmental policy? Can you mention a few recent experience of or coordination mechanisms that are giving positive results that you think that is providing positive results on how a good management of migration should look like? Yeah. Let me talk. Let me use this to talk good about Colombia, and if you want to go ahead, let me give a couple of good experience about Colombia. Look, Colombia, I think that Colombia has actually had one of the most difficult packages of the world. You know, of almost 2 million Venezuelans that have stayed, and some other groups that actually move on the border, and other transiting people going to some other countries. So I think two things that Colombia has done well, and I think it's that we need to recognize and merit them. I think these are I think they are truly important. I think these are we need to imitate these. We should replicate these under different contexts. I think the one is the commitment of actually having someone core central to in charge of migration, because the governments in general, there's I think that the Migration Institute, as many of you well know, because you are there, you have a very reduced environment in migration. So you have the authority of actually seeing who comes in, who goes out, if someone is stopped or detained, maybe processing them for asylum or processing a refugee status, but they can't go into education, they can't go into health issues. And what Colombia did is to have someone in the office from the presidency to have the capacity of actually summoning a council between different agencies. And I think this has been quite useful. Canada does this in a very well way. The Canadians are here present through the Privy Council, and they have a very interministry system, which is very robust in Canada. The U.S., they had a bit more robust with the National Security Council. They actually call up different stakeholders. And I think that this process has been slowed down, but to actually pull all different agencies. I think that Costa Rica actually also has this interministry council. So this capacity of actually see migration policy, not just of under an agency perspective or ministry, but creating mechanisms of interinstitutional mechanism between the government and with civil society. In the Colombian case, there was a recognition of actually working with different municipalities and departments and civil society, and also the international cooperation. The second part that I want to mention, according to the based on the Colombian experience, is the commitment with the integration of migrants that are there present. I think that, different from what we've seen with other large flows of refugees or displaced people, I think Colombia has actually bet on legalizing a lot of people to actually legalize their status. Many of them don't have status, but need to regulate a great number of these migrants, and also placing them in schools and health centers, basically for basic health. What Costa Rica has done as well. You try and work with the Nicaraguans that are in Costa Rica. I think that this has been quite smart. Germany actually did this with Syrians as well. To say, look, if people are here already, why don't we just integrate them? We're not going to put them in refugee camps. We're going to have special programs for Venezuelans or for the Syrians. No, why don't we just integrate them into the communities where they're actually looking in the work market, into schools, in health centers, and within and if possible, we're going to try to actually regularize rather, so they can actually be an integral part of society. I think that this is one of the huge challenges of the countries, the U.S., Mexico, Costa Rica. Right now, we're actually seeing populations with irregular migration groups. And how do you integrate? How do you integrate these people? If you're not going to return them, which is impossible in these cases, what do you do then to actually integrate them? So I think that Colombia right now is not perfect. We can criticize Colombia a lot. If Sergio wants to criticize Colombia, go right ahead. But I think that these great measures also have their limitations, of course. But all of a sudden, as a commitment from the state, what we see in Colombia, this is the commitment from the state of actually doing this, of actually advancing, even with the limitations, even with the difficulties, with the political limitations. And I think these two things, something that how do we coordinate the migration policies in a way which is interministerially, and also including civil society. I think this is fundamental, and not just as authority from one agency, and it's marginalized. So the most benefit from this is the Migration Institute in these cases, most of the times, because in another case it's always fighting to actually move the government apparatus, and they might lose a bit of power, but they actually gain a lot of presence and a lot of influence. The second part is that commitment that people are going to live here, might as well make them, educate them, and especially during the pandemic. And within the possibilities, we know who they are, and we register them, and if they have any legal status. Andrew, thank you so much, Andrew. I do want to give you something that I think that we all know this, but I want to give you a data that reinforces what Andrew says, and it's a profile of the participants that we actually invited into this migration policy from the RCM, and the profiles, and to invite them and to designate that we have part of the audience. We have officials from the different institutes and migration institutes, like you said, that these are obviously, they have core authorities in the discussion, but we also have representatives from the different ministries of foreign affairs of different countries. And we actually added to this officials from the different ministries or entities in charge of actually developing the different development plans of the countries. So in Costa Rica, for example, the planning ministry, for example, and different countries that also have the same name. So these are the entities in charge of actually articulating different government policies, and they're actually leading to this, and they see this as one state policy. And I think it's fundamental, like what Maria actually mentioned. I think it's fundamental because all this has a coordination mechanism. But on planning, like Fabio actually mentioned, planning and finance, depending on the country, or I think plays a very important role that we simply don't recognize. But at the end of the day, they're actually deciding on how the coordination, who is responsible for what. Very silent, but it's this crucial migration issues. Fabio, I also want to, since you mentioned this, Fabio, since you mentioned the profiles of the people that are here, I also want to say that civil society is actually accompanying us today, the session, and to recognize the support that ROCOM and other different countries in these processes, in building these policies, and the contributions from the academia. And I also want to highlight the technical secretariat from the CCM as a matching process from the RCM. So thank you all those that are accompanying us today in the morning. Thank you so much, Fabio. No, that's a great contribution. Thank you so much. They actually play an important role in this, and also welcome the people from the CCM. Sergio, Andrew actually gave you a pass the ball over to the question on maybe you can compliment according to Colombia's experience. If you have any other South American experience or from any other region, please do so. Look, yes, look, Andrew actually indicated a very good experience in Colombia, but actually using the participants from this forum, I do want to provide some recommendations before I dive into what those good practices should be that would be implemented into other countries. I believe that the constellation of public policy necessarily are a process of a strategic planning that necessarily they go through some participation um, processes. So we're actually building policies. The first thing is to identify those intervening factors of those with the competencies and roles from the different sectors that allow to actually unify visions and knowledge to actually be more efficient in the establishment on public policy. So this actually allows to advance on that vision on state, not from government, but as of the state, how to actually benefit from that migration that's reaching our countries that's going to change us. But we need to prepare the institutions not just for that migration that it's easy to foresee, but it's also according to this exponential growth that allows us to actually attend them. And in this regard, I believe that there's been a learning curve, especially for our countries, and also in South America as well, from Peru, Ecuador. We see in Chile, for example, and in Brazil that and after the Haitian earthquake, where we see a flow of Haitian migrants going over to Brazil. Brazil actually issued some humanitarian visas to about 80,000 Haitians that actually demanded, and there was an offer of unskilled labor. That after time, what actually happened is that many of these Haitians actually migrated to Chile. Now. Chile didn't demand visa to Haitians. That's why, because of this mobility of Haitians to Chile. But now we have some visas to Haitians, and now in the region we see some Haitian movements. What's my point with this? My point is to actually indicate that this public policy um, has to be considered among other issues, decisions on political aspects from the many different countries. And in this regard, this horizontal and vertical coordination that we're generating through, like Andrew mentioned, through border management that was created in Colombia or in Costa Rica. That we have a council, or Ecuador, for example, that actually advanced in this in a type of council that articulates these sectors. Necessarily, they must have a regional articulation. I believe that the internal policy of the countries can be developed through the interrelation between the different sectors. But I think at the regional level, I think it's very important as Central America actually does this in Colombia, for example, and in South America, we've actually been advancing in this because the South American Council of Migration is tremendously important for the participation of different stakeholders to actually consolidate these policies. So I believe that on this vision and the framework of policy construction, we need to integrate all the key stakeholders, and it is crucial through different articulation scenarios that we see directly from the high from the presidencies of the republics and the foreign affairs. Were very strong, but we need to consider that the foreign affairs offices were focused on attending the diasporas of our nationals abroad and also the returnees. But we talk about migration, where we see different nationalities because of different reasons with different needs. Necessarily, we include other sectors, fundamental sectors, and in Colombia. And I want to say this because I think it's very important to worth what to say. The contribution of society is very important. I think that we've seen a very important work. I've had the opportunity of actually supporting the IOM in Colombia in this exercise in how the cities have to develop their own integral plans on migration integration that complement the vision of the national level. So if the city and the nation they need to complement each other, and especially in the process of generation of social inclusion and economic inclusion and inclusion, and how we actually reach through political policy guidelines, and how should we get to those migrants to not see xenophobia and to contain these different processes. So this is a good replication, but I also want to highlight the regional plan on response for migration and refugees from the UN, led by OM and from UNHCR. I think this is a wonderful response of how the technical cooperation, what Mary actually said, how from the knowledge of the technical cooperation from the UN agencies and other cooperates, can we actually focus different actions in the different challenges that the countries actually have, precisely to make these inclusion process a little bit easier. In Colombia, they're actually known as GIFI. In Peru and Ecuador, they've actually formed these groups that I believe that they've had a very good articulation in the processes of integration and attention. Thank you, Sergio, for to expand on this perspective in South America. Let me ask the three panel members if we have two more questions. These are two questions that I believe that that's quite interesting to actually listen to the answer from the three panel members. So I'm going to ask them maybe if you can provide us with brief answers to these two questions, so we can actually open up the debate, the Q&A for the participants. That I believe that there's a truly interesting participation and varied participation, and I'm quite sure that they're actually quite interested in talking to all of you. So the questions are this. Let me start with you, Mary. Okay. So we're clear that a good governance of migration requires an articulation and the long-term perspective, or there's interest in long-term interest in policy. So the question basically is this: what will you recommend to a government to communicate the decisions adopted on migration policy matters in terms of communication? How can we actually attend those discrepancies that we might see between the need of adopting ambitious policies long term compared to the decisions that must be made in the short terms due to immediate concerns, fundamental or not, based on the migration phenomena? Mary, and then Sergio, and then Andrew.
Fabio, and I'll be very brief. I'm conscious of time, but I would first, I guess the first key point is, and there has been an enormous amount of commentary and observation and research and analysis on this particular aspect, but how politics and the political cycles in regards to democracies have changed fundamentally because of what Andrew was talking about earlier, the proliferation and the very sophisticated development of ICTs, platforms access around the world. We now have political cycles that need to run on a 24/7 kind of basis. There's no sort of time off. There are kind of cameras. There are commentators everywhere. There is a high level of scrutiny. That is a good thing, but it can also have some real downsides, which goes to emphasize the short-term kind of interests and the difficulties in regards to communicating, hence your question. What I would always say, and it certainly has always been an issue, but I think it's intensifying for policymakers and for politicians to be able to communicate policy decisions. But at the core of it, one thing I think is really fundamental, and that is the quality of the policymaking process and the deliberations. And what I would include in that is also consultations. And what we can learn from some examples of, significant communication problems are not so much communication problems, but they point to some deficiencies within policy deliberations and consultations. And what I'm not necessarily talking about, evidence-based.
Mary. Creo que perdimos a Mary. Mary, ¿nos escuchas?
Sí, para los que estaban escuchando la interpretación en español, tenemos una falla técnica en este momento.
Veo que Mary todavía está en la lista, entonces todavía en teoría está en la reunión. No sé si Mary, ¿nos escuchas? No.
Tal vez, Fabio, perdona, si pasamos con Andrew o
Claro.
con don Sergio por mientras, y así.
Luego retornamos con Mary. Gracias, Luis. Andrew. Sí.
Bueno, y ojalá.
Okay, so hopefully Mary or you can come back but I believe that we need to consider it because why migration is so important, and I think that right now we're actually consumed with the crisis of the moment. Mary actually mentioned about the technology and that we had a crisis and the politicians have to respond, the government has to respond, civil society has to make a position, so everyone is responding quickly. But to consider why is this important, how to actually match with the goals we have for the economic development in our country, for example. Where does the labor market actually match up with this? What does it have to do with our values of society to receive people that they're actually stuck or as refugees or asylum seekers that actually require protection, and how are we actually dealing with the reality if they're not in Costa Rica, for example, and they're actually receiving people from Nicaragua, or if you're in Colombia and if you're seeing people from Venezuela, or if you're in Turkey, you see Syrians coming in. Maybe a part is actually dealing with this reality. In the U.S., for example, you always see people coming from Mexico. The number has gone down. Yes, maybe it's down to 8 to 10% from what they had before. But you're always going to see people coming in because so how do we actually turn that reality turn these realities into virtues? So if we're going to see people, so what can we actually do to actually mitigate this or reduce this? Maybe not the migrational pressures, but on the other side, what are different channels to actually have a labor migration? If we know that there's pressures from Honduras to the U.S. or Mexico, how can we actually think about what are the different pathways of labor migration that actually reduces that pressure? And that way we can actually turn a bad thing into a necessary virtue that actually some way matches with our years of economic development. I think that we always need to think about where this matches up, and this is where finance and planning actually comes in. I think it's something how this matches up in the big pictures, in the larger picture of our interests and our values as society. Yes, so thank you so much. What I believe in this regard is I think that the communications, strategic communications in these migration issues is fundamental. Is basically a well-managed communication actually generates it favors integration, for example. And I think that the first thing that we need to be very clear when we actually have a strategy of how to communicate, to be clear exactly what are we doing. And I think this is done through the establishment of policies. What is our institutional offer? What Andrew has referred to, what are those principles and those values that actually support that policy on solidarity and co-work? So this sounds theoretical, but in the practice, when you actually communicate, that conceptual definition is basically to communicate in a very assertive way and to have cohesion. Also, the communication also has to be seen from the different stages of communication before the migration communication, and also the different levels of communication as well. And for this, it's important to identify, where do we actually want to reach? We want to reach the migrants. Of course, we want to reach the migration, the receiving population. Of course, yes, that we actually fail a lot in the country. Fail a lot. I think we actually almost never develop these. And we also need to be very clear what our capacities in the instruments of communication, but also through the different messages, because I think that the governments, we need to focus maybe more on communication. And there's a lot of investigators who actually develop these issues. They're not the same, but actually I share them on the need to build reflective and critical cultures with these migrational processes. And to actually advance on that, we need to clearly identify content that are not just based on real facts, but they actually respond to the identity and culture of the communities that we actually want to reach. So I think that we need to do an important strategic work that also allows us to actually support digital communication, for example, networks today. I think it's a huge issue in regards to migration. There's a huge component and some other mechanisms of traditional communication where effectively we can actually reach as well. So to communicate strategically, it must be one of these fundamental elements on policies to actually generate those cohesion instruments and capacity of actually advancing on this matter. Thank you so much, Andrew and Sergio. Quite interesting. I think Mary. I think Mary is back on. Mary, are you listening to us? And Mary, if it's okay, I think that are you there? I think we already have some very interesting questions to actually start the Q&A session and the participants from the session. Mary, I think that can you hear us? Are you in? Mary? No. Okay. So you might have some issues. Okay. In any case, let me go ahead and let me ask the very last question that we have for the panel, and we can start with the open Q&A session for different representatives of our CMs and from civil society, because I think we have some very interesting questions. And basically, it's the very last question has to do with an experience. I think Mary, either some measure or experience, specific measure or experience that you believe, Andrew, Sergio, or Mary, that we need to see in this region of the world. Is there something that's being doing in an innovative way that it might be interesting to actually consider in our region as well? Any? Look, I think that thank you, Andrew. I think that right now the huge challenge that we have from the countries is to consolidate that integral public policy, intersectoral and multidimensional. And I think that many of the countries of the region, we've actually advanced quite a bit in this. And as a matter of fact, I've had the opportunity of understanding that many people and many parts of the government actually want to invite you to reflect upon this, on the fact that have a few institutional actions or a few strategic guidelines. They consider that this is already public policy, but I think that we need to think about the macro part, how we actually articulate in this. And for this, so we've actually developing experiences in Colombia. We actually developed experiences. Other countries that actually reinforce their frameworks. I think it's very important to actually allow to actually advance in this context. But in this exercise of consolidating this public policy, I think it's important, first of all, to have a political decision from the high government, from the intersectoral on the need of actually having public policies, because sometimes we should start the process of advancing on this public policies, but different sectors don't understand and they see different tensions or stresses that they don't allow to develop the process. And I see this clearly and openly. I know the majority of the participants are foreign affairs officers, but we see some rows of tensions between the foreign affairs and the secretaries of the interior and the government, as well as other sectors of where these sectors these issues should be led. So I think it's very important to have a decision of the government to actually start with this. Two, we need to make the stakeholders aware or sensitize them. Sometimes they actually fear migrational issues, and they're very clear, like developing public policies in regards to the population, for example. So we need to facilitate the government and different sectors that awareness of what is the development of a public policy, what does a public policy implies. And I think it's very important. The access to information is number three. I think it's fundamental access to information and sources to data. Data sources. Many times when we actually do the budgetary analysis or the budgetary study to see exactly what are the investment costs or what are the budgetary and project that exercise, we find a few bottlenecks, because truly the countries, we didn't have that traceability before. And I think that we need to be aware on the development of this, and the construction of different teams is fundamental to actually develop this process. So that experience that we're actually developing public policies in a macro way, most likely the trend is going to continue in the Migration Pact actually shows this. And SDGs also indicates this. And I think when we should start with these public policies, and I think these are the recommendations that I can provide. Look, I think that in what we're actually seeing in the region, I think that the narrative in the region right now, first of all, is of a crisis. And yes, we're in the pandemic, but before or pre-COVID, the quick movements that we can't control, and the response is okay. How can we actually close? Let's close the systems, close the asylum systems, and simply we actually repel anyone who's coming in. That's the macro narrative. We're gonna send the Hondurans back to Salvador, or the Mexicans to El Salvador, et cetera, right? And let's take them out of there. I think that there's some other issues that's going on, and that about 5 or 10 minutes ago, the Canadian court just overthrew the agreement between the U.S. and Canada. So if you go to CNN, just check that they got rid of the trade agreement over there. But I think this is an experiment that we need to recognize what's going on, and one of these is these are processes of actually making that protection a bit closer. So we've been agreed that if you're in IOM or UNHCR with the government of Costa Rica, the government of the US, and having agreements of transferring this protection. I don't know what the word is, a protection transfer agreement. That actually tried to actually you don't have to go 2,000 miles with the border of the U.S., but to seek out cases that they actually require protection and how to resettle them to actually take them to a safe countries, either U.S., Brazil, Uruguay, Australia, or whatever. So this is a close protection where people should live, and I think this is going to be a trend. Not get rid of protection, but not open up the systems of asylum that haven't been capable of actually processing everyone. We need to seek out those middle points and more agile that require protection without creative incentives for a labor migration. So this is happening in Mexico. We need to recognize Mexico that's done tremendous work to actually expand their capacities with the help of UNHCR and IOM to actually deal with this, and also that resettlement in Mexico to places where you have a macro labor migration labor. The U.S., since I already criticized my own government of the U.S., I also want to say something positive about the U.S. That I feel that something good that he tried to do in the U.S. is they actually wanted to they had a program, a labor program for Central American. It failed because of COVID. It just wasn't possible because COVID and recession came over. Basically tried for the first time to have a quota of visas for temporary workers for Central Americans that came in through Mexico and Jamaica. So the idea of creating certain things for Honduras and Salvador, there are ways of actually doing this. Costa Rica actually tried to do this with the Nicaraguans that actually come to work with agriculture. Didn't work all that great, but the idea is a good idea. And then COVID came over. But we have options of thinking how, instead of seeing this mass and crisis, how can we actually start seeing different groups? There are a few of them that actually need protection. Those are that actually do need to work, and we actually need them to work in the country. So how can we actually start to work with this? And I think that behind of what we actually see, sometimes we go with the axe and trying to actually destroy and to separate everything and to see if I think that behind this we have experiences that are very creative that are actually being seen in the region that are a lot more useful, a lot more surgical to see exactly how we can actually save the patient. We need to move certain organs, but let's save the patient. So at the end of the day, we need to build upon those bases as much as possible. Excellent. Thank you so much. I think that Mary is connected.
In terms of and the support from Kudos actually in terms of trying to get back online, but I really I could hear some of the discussion. Unfortunately, I dropped out at certain points, so forgive me if I have repeated a couple of elements, but really two very, very quick things.
Yep, perfect.
One relates to the sort of the more granular issue of visas, which goes back to something that Andrew said right at the very beginning. And that is about crafting bilateral, trilateral, multilateral, programmatic responses in regards to access to visas that are able to incorporate aspects in regards to countering irregular migration, smuggling and trafficking, support human development within origin settings, and also manage protection issues. So moving away from the compartmentalizing of, labour migrants, forced migrants, international students, family reunion and so on, but to be able to look at communities and to be able to understand what are the incentive structures that operate both in regards to communities and migrants within the communities. So, international remittances, some parts of the world, you need to send your eldest son to migrate internationally so that the eldest son can support the family. And that's, West Asia in particular, and my doctoral research is on Hazaras, and it's a very strong element in terms of Hazara migration. But trying to understand those communities and how they have adapted so that you can pull together cooperatively a number of different elements and move away from this compartmentalizing to understanding communities, both in origin, transit and destination. The second one is really one that I've had the privilege to be involved in, mainly on the sidelines, but certainly during its inception phase. And this is a political response that has been adopted in Asia, and it's the Asia Dialogue on Forced Migration, which is emulating track 2 processes in diplomacy for very wicked problems, very significant problems where you have, gridlocks occurring in regards to cooperation. This is really not a track 2 as such, this process. It's a track 1.5 because it does involve senior officials. But the way that they have very carefully crafted it is outside of government. It's funded by private sector, philanthropic, civil society. It is run by a think tank within the region, and it enables some of those very, very tricky issues to be kind of taken offline. And there are between states, we all know that. It can be kind of difficult at times with crisis situations especially. And I should add that this actually emerged out of a crisis situation in regards to forced migration within Southeast Asia in particular, and the Rohingya flows of 2012, 2013, 15, which of course we are also seeing occurring again, well before the very large flows out of Myanmar in 2017. So what they've been able to do is take the heated and contested issues offline. They operate with experts, small groups of people, but they operate in a political environment. So they do have people from, Prime Minister's offices and President's offices within the region to be able to galvanise and get the discussion going on some of the sort of the gristle, the difficult issues that then can feed into RCPs, that then can feed into some of the bilateral discussions, that can feed into discussions with IOM and UNHCR in the region in terms of services and solutions and so forth. So that is something that I've seen operate. It started, as I mentioned, quite some time ago. It is still going. They're still meeting regularly, and it is like a decompression chamber for those very difficult policy issues within the region. Thanks.
Gracias, Mari. Qué interesante ejemplo y qué interesante concepto que usted.
It's a very interesting concept. Thank you so much for coming back in so let's go into the Q&A session. Thank you so much for the panel members for this very exciting discussion. So let's include the different participants. Thank you once again to the panel members. Thank you so much, Fabio, for leading this section. And we have about 35 minutes. We have 35 minutes for this Q&A session. Okay. So we're gonna ask you, if you're gonna ask your question, please be as brief as possible. And also to the panel members, we're gonna ask if you can actually be very brief on your answers to actually use the very little time we have left. By order, we have 2 questions, one from Honduras and another from Panama. And I'm gonna read right now. And also Gabriela Rodriguez from Marrocom, and also Alvaro Gocochea from the CCM. So if you ask for the mic, please write down your name in the request list tab, and then just click on the blue button to speak. And so the colleagues that actually deal with the technical part can actually provide support to this. So let's see. So with Honduras, so, so according to your experience, the first line is strategic planning, of course, the combined with operational planning and participative planning. However, how do you align the annual budgets to this reality? So, Glenn actually mentioned that the construction from the communities is important to identify the specific needs of our population and link their incomes versus expenditure versus public expenditure. So how do we actually balance this challenge on public budgets when we actually build the different public policies? So I don't know if some of the panel members wants to answer, and then we'll go over to the Panama's question. If anyone wants to answer this. Sergio, if you can come back in, Andrew, if you want to answer. Yeah. Look. If I understand correctly, it's I want to see what are the needs of those who want to migrate or those who are returning. I didn't understand the question that well. So Honduras actually says that the construction from the communities to identify specific needs of the population. So how do we actually link the population needs versus the reality of income and expenses and the public investments? So maybe those subject to migration due to circumstances. I think that's the I think that's the key question right there. I think that's one of the key questions in regards to migration. I think that first, I think they need to base on the fact that many people are going to migrate. Okay, at this moment, many people are going to migrate. They're going to migrate because we still have a demographics of young people that are not going to. They can't deal with the labor market, at least in Honduras and Guatemala, Salvador. They have a larger population, as well as Mexico. It's a population. There are less young people. Costa Rica, same thing. Panama, the same thing. But I think Honduras and Guatemala, Honduras, I think it's going to reach this point before in the demographic part, but Guatemala is in the long term, and Honduras as well. So we're going to see people who are going to immigrate. So I think there's an issue of how to actually generate, and I think this should be a dialogue, and I think it should be there should be a dialogue from the Honduran government and from society with the U.S. and with the U.S. and Mexico. And between, I know there's this recession and global recession and COVID. It's not going to happen, but we need to be realist. Of people are always going to migrate. So how do we do this in a legal way? Number two, what can we do so that people can actually have a basic dignity to actually stay, so they don't feel forced or try to release that pressure? And I think this is very difficult. And I think this is where we have political issues that I dare to say and not deepen on this. Of Central American, I'm not Central American, but I know that there's some rights issue when people actually consider if they're going to improve or not when they actually decide to migrate. And many people, they actually make find the decision, and not just if I want to be better, if it's greener on their side, or if my income can go up. But I think that if I stay over here, that the circumstances are going to change. Because if they're going to change, then I'll just stay, right? I mean, just to travel 2,000 miles away with my kids, I don't like that idea. So I'm gonna stay put. If I think that things will be better in 10 years, then I'll stay. If I don't trust on that, if I don't believe in that, then I will migrate. So I think these are things that go beyond the policies of economic development. I think these are issues of construction of a society that actually provides trust to people. Sergio? Yes, very esteemed, please. I thank you so much, Andrew. Look, I think that the question has a technical component which is quite relevant, quite strong, and I think that currently the countries we've actually been generating a series of expenses in investment and as well as in functioning, and to improve the infrastructure that truly we haven't really followed up on this. I think that the planning entities in our country, call it the National Planning of Colombia, of the coordination system in Honduras, and what do you want to name it? One of the conditions to develop public policy is precisely to actually have a budgetary analysis, because otherwise you cannot forecast or project resources that effectively will serve to leverage public policy and its execution, and the rest will be left in ideas and in good intentions that will never be developed. So based on this, I believe that the first thing that we actually have to do with these budgetary analysis is as a matter of fact, the sectors such as education, sectors such as health, sectors such as labor markets, they didn't have budgetary items, line items, and they've actually been integrating the migrant population. But we need to assess the cost of those plannings, programs, and plans that are being developed. So let's say that this is a methodological process, and that's why one of the big recommendations when you actually build public policy is to facilitate those mechanisms and instruments that allow to actually access these resources. And in this regard, we need to align the strategic planning. All of our countries actually have a few strategic plans on the country view that allow sustainable development. So it's fundamental to actually see exactly what's that alignment, the national alignment, and that national alignment at the institutional level, and how are we responding to this? And on this, to actually carry out an analysis which implies necessary to actually access the planning chiefs to actually, or planning leads to actually add these budgetary items. And with that, we can identify it and to carry out some projections on budgets. So due to the context from migration, this will always we always have some scarce resources, but we want to be more efficient. And these are actually done with the planning leads of each of the areas, and this is done in investment and expenses of the public agencies in projections according to the strategic plans in the 10 years. And these can easily, and this will be the procedures from the technical level. Thank you much, Sergio. All these elements, so we need to take them into consideration in building this public policy and the same implementation. I think it's possible to actually do this, but I know that our institutions in our countries are actually quite complex, and the procedures are quite complex. But it's possible to do this. Mary, do you want to add something, or we can go on to the next question?
Just add in to projections and being able to understand what population projections might be entailing, both at the national level and also regional and global level. And I would just highlight a report that came out only a couple of weeks ago, where for a demographer such as myself, when you're working on population policies, so you have to have the bedrock of population policies in order to be able to then articulate exactly where the priorities are in terms of budget issues, education, health, other services, as Andrew mentioned. Also the rule of law and trust and confidence in governance is particularly important, as we know, in migration. But to be able to understand how migration flows and movements can radically shift and change is a very substantial issue. And we had a report come out just 2 weeks ago in regards to, well, we think that now the global population projection is actually 2 billion out. It's going to be lower, and for these various reasons. It's a constant area of inquiry. It's a constant area in terms of data collection and analysis. And I would point to the geopolitical schisms, the big events, the big displacement events that can really throw a whole range of different policy settings out. We only need to look at Venezuela, for example, to see the very substantial issues that have arisen in regards to responding to a crisis that also then have underlying issues in regards to sustainable development, as Sergio mentioned. So collecting information in regards to populations and communities at the national level, at the local level, again, as Sergio mentioned earlier, and how urbanization is occurring is fundamental. It's like a bedrock core issue in terms of being able to formulate policies that can be delivered to communities, whether that's local, city level, national level, and so on. Thanks.
Muchas gracias, Mary.
Thank you so much, Mary. Let me go to the next two questions. They're very specific, and this is from Panama. The first question: how can we actually integrate the communication media? The communication media, they're key to communicate the process and migration policies, but every once in a while we find certain things, so xenophobic and tones in certain messaging or communication. So how can you actually integrate if we have laws of protection to exercise certain occupations or that exclude those that are not nationals from that country in particular? I think this is these are the protections of what percentage can be foreigners, or what professions can be, if they can validate your studies. I mean, who are against those who actually study abroad. So these are broader issues. I think that first of all, I think it's important to articulate of why is migration important. Okay, there's a lot of areas of controversy in regards to migration, and a few of them are going to be controversial. But one that we need some sort of consensus is that we have a group of a cluster of talent, and Central America and Mexico should not be left behind in this process. We need to attract the qualified and skilled people. We need to use those who actually are here. If you have Venezuelan doctors and they can exercise the public service, medical service, then you lose as a country. We had that issue in the U.S. There's a huge debate of medical people that are trained abroad that go into the U.S. and how can actually validate their diplomas in times when you need them for medical attention. If they can actually be doctor, maybe a few can be doctor, but they can be in a different area of public service, medical public service, in attending health, not as a doctor. Maybe they're not going to be creating surgery, operating on people, but we can actually channel them to actually provide a medical service in a different way because of their knowledge. We need to use that, the engineers and all this, okay? And we need to attract Panama, same thing as US, same thing as Mexico, same thing as Costa Rica. You actually need people. You need to attract talent for your innovative industries and businesses. So I think it's an area that we need to sell this as it is, which is part of not being left behind with the worldwide talent. The communication media, okay, this is a bit more complicated. I think that we need to work with civil society and with the academia to have trustworthy information. This is not a complete answer, because otherwise you're not going to solve the problem. Because at least the least you could do is to actually have data, certain data on criminal activity and migration. For example, in South America, we have a study from 3 countries where we clearly see that migrants are not criminals, and they don't do or dwell into criminal activities. But we need to showcase this. They're less likely to go into criminal activities. So in a few countries, they have maybe lesser percentage of they maybe have small theft and petty theft, but bigger crime, no, it doesn't happen. So we need data that allows to actually to have trustworthy data. And this does not solve the problem. I think that the media, they're going to do whatever they want. They'll do whatever they have to do. But at least they have information or access to information at hand and try to control this, to control the narrative with facts. And to be honest, at the end of the day, the worst is how to sell something that's not true. If it turns out that, for example, that in a case that, in a case that in a country that migrants actually commit a lot of this crime, but in a country, migrants did do a lot of crime, did go into crime, and this happened to one country. They're being arrested for lesser crimes, but not for major crimes. So we need to be honest about this. We need to say the truth, and we do have a problem. I don't know what you think if it's published in the press, but I'm saying that there's not a problem. If you need to be honest and trustworthy. We have issues with competence in employment. Okay. We know that we know in the field we have no competence, but we know that in construction, for example, we have a group of people and we're attending them in a certain way. We also need to be honest with all these issues, as like you are trying to do as well. Thank you so much, Andrew. Due to time, let me go to the next question. Okay, Gabriel Rodriguez from Marocom. Gabriela actually asked for the floor. So Gabriela, if you can ask your question, please. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone? Go ahead with your question, Mrs. Gabriela. Like on behalf of ROCOM, greetings and thank you so much for all the panel members, excellent panel members that that are here. My comment or question rather is in regards to as you generate public policy. I think that I think that we have many different issues that must be integrated and not unisectoral. And I think that we're very well aligned in this. But I would like to hear about a good practice that we've had here in Orocom, and also that we've had in Costa Rica in particular. We have a support from civil society in the construction of the different action plan of this public policy. When civil society is consulted, or in general consulted in the region, and we have when we have a good relationship with the state authorities and the government, we see that it is more effective, and civil society can support at the macro level, which would be with the National Migration Council or similar in other countries, and micro at the community level. So I think it's important to have the presence and the multisectoral parts of all the different stakeholders, so we can have a policy that responds to the realities and according to the needs of the different stakeholders. Like I mentioned, that includes the migrants that want some kind of solution to the problems, people that actually are seeking help or asylum or some sort of protection, which is a different type of migration, of course, and how we actually articulate this with the programs, the labor programs, so that we won't see or have some kind of interface or some kind of so this will get complicated. So I believe that this is excellent to talk about this in an integral way, and then also in a multi-sectoral way, interinstitutional, and then to having all the different stakeholders in the that are present as the panel members, like you said, and they're going to have best practices, especially right now. And this is even more difficult because of COVID. So the very last thing, I think it's important to actually talk about that particular protection, that not necessarily has to be someone who's going to ask for asylum or is asking for refuge, but how we actually match this migration policy and integrate that complementary protection to these people. And that's my greater question. Thank you so much, Gabriela. And Rocom, I also want to say that this issue that Gabriela has actually mentioned, we will actually talk about this in the very last webinar. So please join us in the very last webinar. This is the first part. So hopefully Sergio or Mary or someone wants to add. Yes, look, thank you so much, Luis Alonso. I want to truly thank Gabriela and everyone from Rocom, from Ericom. So you talked about the most relevant, the most important issues, and it's precisely how we actually engage civil society and the participation from the different communities in the establishment of public policy. And I think it's fundamental. I think that so today there's no public policy or no bigger work or infrastructure that doesn't go through a consultation and consult with society. I think this is quite relevant. And for this, we need to distinguish the different stages and processes in the construction of public policy. I think that in the region, we've actually seen this, and I've actually worked on this, and I had the opportunity of actually being a consul of Colombia in Chile, a country with a large community of Colombians. And I think we need to strengthen the civil society because through this articulated work with civil society from the perspective of the government and public policy, you can actually focus and identify clearly the strengths and weaknesses in all the different processes of assistance and generation of a socioeconomic inclusion. It's the populations and associations of civil associations that allow us to facilitate and identify those vulnerabilities and weaknesses. I'll give you a specific case. For example, the issue of professional diploma validations. Clearly, this is one of the issues which is the most complicated issues of public policies and bottlenecks when you actually generate processes and inclusion processes, especially labor and economic inclusion processes. And these associations of the migration population and the beneficiary population, and also from the associations of professionals in the countries, is fundamental to actually articulate those lines of action to solve those issues. In other words, it's clearly from when you validate professional diplomas to actually seek an outlet of that issue that we're seeing in different countries. Necessarily, you need to think about making the standards a bit more flexible, the laws more flexible to actually validate those professional diplomas in the country. You need to consult those professional associations, the medical and engineering associations, to facilitate these processes, precisely to actually find an outlet for this, and precisely to actually we need to consult the migration community that identifies and to actually helps to channel exactly where we need to carry out those efforts. So I think it's of a great importance to actually build this diagnostics and to actually open those bottlenecks and to also find outlets for this. Right now with this COVID issue, this COVID-19 issue, I think that the greatest effort of the work from the government in border management in Colombia has been focusing with the associations in Venezuelans to identify where those weaknesses need to be attended to. So I think it's of great importance that feedback from Ms. Gabriela, and I think it's fundamental to build public policies. Thank you, Sergio. Now, Alba Gogocheo from the CCM, the Technical Secretariat. Alba, you have the floor. Thank you so much. I also want to greet, and I appreciate Luis and Andrew, and of course Gabriela. And look, I actually want to ask you a quick question, a specific question that has to do with the current scenario and with the complexities that we see currently, the governance from the regional point of view. How do you actually see 20 years out after the consolidation of the South American Council and this new governance period, in considering the three main principles of what it was built from the South American part that has to do with the migration as part of the regional integration and sub-regional, and of course from the Mercosur, the link between the economic and social development of the countries of origin and migration, and finally a central axis, which is being the protection of human rights of migrants. It's how do you see basically this regional space today under this new complex actuality that we have. Thank you, Alba, for Abalance. For those of you, for the panel members, Mary, if you have the word, maybe you can actually answer this question if you want.
I will, but not from a regional perspective. Thank you very much. And it is a very pointed and probably the big question, actually, in regards to what we will be looking at over the next couple of decades. I hate to say it, but the outlook in regards to the adherence to human rights more broadly, and I'm not talking specifically in regards to migration, is not good. We are seeing all of the issues that have been discussed today in regards to, communications technologies, the politicization of public policy, the geopolitics that are emerging in regards to the pursuit of power, are really pointing to a very, very challenging time in the next decade and beyond. This is going to have very significant implications for being able to safeguard the human rights of populations at risk of displacement, whether that is related to environmental displacement, whether that's related to persecution and human rights abuses in origin countries, or whether that's related to, severe and profound insecurity, whether that's economic security, whether that is in regards to violence, community violence. We will see a very challenging environment ahead. And that is precisely why I think I completely agree with Gabriella earlier and Sergio in regards to how important it is for civil society actors to be involved and to be consulted in regards to the content of policy, but also partners in the delivery of public policy programs and services. And I think this is particularly important. How will it play out for the Americas? I'm not too sure, but I think for other parts of the world, we will see some changes because of new generations coming through and not wanting to tolerate misinformation, disinformation, human rights abuses, the abuse of political power. And I do think we're starting to see some of those manifestations occurring now. And I think it will be a fairly turbulent time in certain parts of the world going forward.
Muchas gracias, Mary, por la respuesta.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your answers. Can you compliment Sergio? Can you compliment or add to this question? Absolutely. Luis, thank you so much. No, for a special greetings to Elba. What I consider is that the South American Conference on Migration is a regional conference. They play a very crucial role in this within the analysis, within the reflection, within the generation of a discussion, of high-level discussion, where we can actually discuss in a very flexible and generous way. I think it's very important. As a matter of fact, the process of Quito, in one of its recommendations, they indicate the importance of the regional conference from South America on migration. So I think that from the greatest importance with this issue of complying and development of human rights, I think that what I believe is that we need to be very operational and proactive in how all these different standards that actually form part of the universal system on human rights. There are more than 13 international mechanisms, more than 9 mechanisms that actually form part of the Inter-American Human Rights Mechanism that is actually subscribed to our country. So the huge challenge is how these conventions, how these agreements, can we actually lower them at the institutional level and to the practical way from the knowledge of the officials that sometimes they're not aware of these state commitments. And that also actually creates weakness of understanding that migration is a humanity issue and the responsibility of the states, not just from the government. So I think that we have a lot to develop, and I think that we've actually shown this historically, right? And let's remember that the Ariane actually was born in South America with a few of the other proposals from 2012, and I think I think this is fundamental to actually consider. Thank you so much, Sergio. Yes, we have about 30 seconds, right? So, okay, first of all, greetings and congratulations of everything that you're doing. I think that all the different systems in South America are actually based, or actually overwhelmed rather, because of these facts. But I think that does not mean that they're not important, right? I think that a great part of why South America actually has responded very well to a greater crisis of Venezuelans and other unexpected arrivals. I think this is a greater, major unexpected crisis. It has to do with the construction that was done previously, right? I think that the regional construction, I think they're overwhelmed. I think we cannot, I think this is a very complicated time for now, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. I think this actually shows of what's being done in the different countries and the communication zone. And I think that we need to start to actually build another portion of this, but this is also important. I think this is a lesson for Central America as well, and Canada and the U.S. and Dominican Republic. This parallel construction, it's also, I think that does not mean that the efforts and the communication is not important, and it's not going to be important in the reconstruction of what we're going to see in the future. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I see, briefly, I want to congratulate the CCM that this year it's their 20th anniversary, and the RCM, of course, it's going to be 25 years in November. So I think these are very mature for the processes that reflect experiences that are built through the countries and thanks to the member countries and civil society. So this is the very last question, which is from civil society because of time. It says, I just want to congratulate every panel members for their intervention. There's huge gaps from the countries in the region in the framework on the construction of public policies in favor of migrants and their families, because it's not just the creation. It's not just the creation actually takes or creates a policy based on that. Can the experts share a good practice or best practice in the construction of these public policies? But also, they can also serve as a model so the countries in the region and focus on human rights and not basically on border protection. I don't know, whoever, I mean, you can read the question in the chat. Whoever wants to refer to this. Look, I think that we need to rebuild the protection systems. I think that the trend right now, actually covered by the RCM, has been thrusted by my country. I know this. It's been the deconstruction of these systems, and hand in hand, we need to go with civil society to actually. It's like when your house burns down. So you rebuild your house, but you build it better when your house burns down. And that's exactly how we should do this, to think about society and the governments, how we can actually rebuild the protection systems. And I think we're going to reach a moment that we need to actually reconstruct and see how we can reconstruct this so it can be more effective and efficient, and how to attend the protections to not create incentives or perverse incentives on migration. But we need to follow with the normatives, basic normatives that we need, that people actually require the protection, and we need to do this. And I think this is an equal responsibility, and it's part of our values. And I think that we have moments for reconstruction that are quite important. The governments cannot do this without society. I think that we need to go hand in hand to actually rethink about this, and also by the academia as well. And I'll also add that according to this challenge, based on the question, in migration policy, besides the human rights and protection issues, they also form part of the security of regarding deportations and border cases, detention. All this also forms part of migration policy, which is the exercise on migration control. So certainly, it's a question that's quite challenging. Sergio, yeah, I just want to add what Andrea actually mentioned, is that effectively, so this is one of the main consensus and discussions that must be carried out at the very beginning of the establishment of that policy about 12 years ago. As a matter of fact, after the unfortunate 9/11 events, everyone talked about security and safety and threats to national security. But I think that the issue has evolved and matured. I think that the both issues can complement each other on the sovereignty and safety and security of the nation and the individuals is born out of the guarantees and human rights and the protection from the migrant population. And that we need a balance does not mean that we're actually ceding on any of the issues. We had this theoretical discussion on the restrictive and facilitating dialogue, but I think that a good example of this, and seen from the migration authorities in the region has actually changed from being a policing authority, of being authorities on national defense, of being authorities on more of an administrative authority, that they have roles and components on safety and security, but their capacity is on the analysis of the information and to provide administrative information and to facilitate process and to be instruments of guarantee and protection. Thank you. Look, because of time that we're completely out, which is our main enemy, we need to wrap up. But also, I want to have the very last question from Guatemala, and with that, we would close. Guatemala, actually, what do you recommend from the Guatemalan Migration Institute? Because we're about to finish the transition from going from the Institute of Guatemala on migration. So what would you recommend to formulate the migration policy in Guatemala under this context? So with this question, we close. and the panel members can actually answer. Yeah, Mary?
I will actually hand that over to my esteemed panelists, actually, because I think whatever I might be able to add might not necessarily be able to reflect the intricacies of Guatemala's needs.
Yo simplemente quiero decir lo que acaba de decir Sergio, ¿no? Que
I'll just refer to what Sergio actually said. At Migration Institute, it was very well said. I'll just repeat what he said. I think that the effectiveness of a Migration Institute is to not think about just as a police institute. They have police authorities or competencies, of course, but it's public policies of generating public policies, of course, of statistics and capacity of governing a policies of working with other elements of the government, with society. In the case of Guatemala, I think that we're talking about a transitioning of a return of migrants that come out of border control, of attracting human capital as well. I think that we need to think about this, a part of attracting human capital, the reinsertion of human capital that comes back into the country. So I think all these elements and how we formulate the policies, and not just policies, not just by institutions, but different stakeholders in the government and local governments and society, with the institute as the governing body of this process. Sergio? Look, I think Andrew actually made it quite clear. I think I'm in the same. I completely agree with him. It's administrative competencies of providing information, facilitating process, and to help the migration to be orderly and to help the migrants. I think that we've done a very important exercise in South America that's worth to highlight. I think that right now that even though this migration of Venezuelans has been exponential, has been one of the biggest in the world. If we see the numbers of how many refugees have actually been obtained from this, I think that other systems of documentations have been challenged. The permission of transit, and the state, and they issued a few visas in this regard, but the technical assistance from migration and from the migration institution and the migration authorities of accompanying the governments to adopt great measures to facilitate and ensure the protection measures on human rights, and also these safety conditions. I think this is something we need to partner with those other institutes. Thank you, Mary, Andrew, and Sergio, for your contributions. So before we wrap up, I pass the mic to Fabio, so he can actually do a recap for future sessions as part of this programs and the tools that we have. Fabio? Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much for the three panel members, Mary, Sergio, and Andrew. It's been a true pleasure to have you online. It's been quite stimulating to start with this session. The next sessions are quite valuable because we're going to approach different topics that have been proposed in the questions. For example, next week we'll approach the issue on the design of migration policy, not just with a few tools, but also with the experience of a few other countries. It's going to be quite great to see how design a migration policy. Then we'll go into the evidence base and the implementation and monitoring of migration policy, and we will wrap up with the third session, virtual session, with on the cross-cutting and how we actually link migration to other sectoral policies. Remember that in the eCampus space, you'll find a series of resources that we actually that Andrew, Mary, and Sergio actually facilitated. And remember to complement to actually answer the survey, because that actually helps us to how to improve designs and future events. So thank you so much, the RCM and the Pro Tempore Presidency, and thank you very much. Thank you, Fabio. Once again, thank you, IOM and Pisano, who wasn't able to accompany us today. But I also want to thank Alexandra Bani and also the experts from today, Sergio, Andrew, and Mary. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. It was very interesting. And from the Executive Secretary and IOM, we're available for any questions. Please accompany us next week in the next panel. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. and we'll wrap up today's session. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.